Dear guests here at the Center for European Reform, the guests joining us online from across the UK and across Europe. It is a very great pleasure and honor to welcome you all to the second joint event of the Center for European Reform and Hans Seidel Foundation, second event this year because our cooperation dates back much longer. And it is not only our second event, it is also day one after Donald Trump's Liberation Day, which of course was all around the media. It is also a few weeks after we had the infamous meeting in the White House between President Volodymyr Zelensky and President Donald Trump and his Deputy Vice President J.D. Vance. And at the same time, whoever thought that the official rhetoric is just a show, I think since Signalgate, we know that actually what they're saying, they also believe quite a lot in what they're saying openly. At the same time, it is just a few days after Russia announced a record draft. So as some of you know, Russia has two drafts, a season, basically a year, a spring and an autumn draft. And there will be over 160,000 young people joining the ranks of the Russian army by around July. At the same time, Russia is intensifying its hybrid warfare against Europe. And at the same time, we have more and more European security services openly saying that Russia is not only willing, but will probably be able to attack a European NATO country in a few years. Now, this leaves us in a situation where Europe finds itself, on the one hand, facing a very imperialist Russia to the east, an imperialist Russia that shows no sign of actually showing a willingness for peace, for any peace that does not end with the destruction of any independent and sovereign Ukrainian state. At the same time, we have for the first time in a very, very long time, the first time since the Second World War, where Western Europe, and now at large Europe as such, has actually a situation where the transatlantic partnership is being openly questioned. At the same time, however, we see something we could consider as Zeitenwende 2.0. So after the infamous meeting in the White House, we saw that the potential next governing coalition in Germany, they decided together with the Greens in the Bundestag to actually reform the debt brake to some extent, to come up with a very strong answer saying that we have experienced a paradigm shift in transatlantic security and also European security. At the same time, we have a rearm project introduced by the European Commission. At the same time, we have a certain rapprochement between the UK and the European Union with a summit coming up next month. So we are facing a very uncertain environment, but at the same time, we show some willingness to react to this environment. And the question is, how do we coordinate our answers and how do we coordinate our actions? And one of the formats that often comes up is the Weimar Triangle format, and by extension, the Weimar Plus format. So Weimar Triangle format was set up in 1991. I think it very nicely shows that what happens in international affairs is very much shaped also by what happens in domestic affairs. So if you look by 1991, it was the moment in 1989, we had the first free elections in Poland, we then had the transformation period, and the Weimar Triangle per outset was supposed to be actually a format that stands for reconciliation between former adversaries, but also a format that looks into the future, that helps Poland with its post-communist transformation and integration later on into European and transatlantic structures. Now this format has evolved. It also had its problematic times. 2016, we had the Law and Justice government in power in Poland, and then Foreign Minister Witold Waszczykowski openly said that the Weimar Triangle is not in the national interest of Poland. So they basically, as it is an informal platform, so to say, an informal alliance, one can say, it didn't mean that they withdraw entirely from it. But the cooperation, the discussions, they were curbed quite significantly. Now, the question we can ask ourselves is, then we saw, of course, in 2022, there was new impetus to the Weimar Triangle. We then saw in 2023 with a new government in Poland, the kind of a kickstart to the Weimar Triangle. And to use the words of Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, the question that we should ask ourselves today is whether the Weimar Triangle and the Weimar Plus format, which seems very livable, very lively, whether this is the answer of the 500 million Europeans to defend themselves and coordinate their actions against 150 million Russians, irrespective of the 300 million Americans. So this is kind of the lead question we are trying to look at today. And I will ask our great panelists here. And it's really a great honor to welcome our panelists who come from 4 countries, representing not only the core of the Weimar Triangle, but also by extension, the plus in the Weimar. And I will start on the very left with Nicolai von Ondarza. He comes from Berlin. He is the head of EU/Europe research program at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Germany's one of the most prominent German think tanks. Then to my left, we have Joséphine Staron. She is the head of studies and international relations at the French think tank SYNOPIA, which advises also the French government, comes up with a bunch of ideas how to shape the French state. And then to my right, we see Marshal Michał Kamiński, who's the deputy marshal of the Polish Senate. He has been in politics for almost 3 decades. And he was also an EU parliamentarian for many, many years. He was the founder of the ECR group in the European Parliament and the chairman of the ECR group as well. And then to the right, we see the plus in the Weimar Triangle, Peter Watkins. He's right now an associate fellow at Chatham House. He, as I discovered last week, is also a fellow at RAND. Before this, he looks at a very distinguished career. He was the director for Strategy International at the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom, and he was also the director of the UK Defense Academy. So I think we have a very, very exciting, very interesting panel here with speakers that will really shed light on the dynamics in Europe through the Weimar Plus format. And I will start with Nicolai, not only because he sits on the far left, but it really nicely connects to the discussion we had 6 weeks ago. So 6 weeks ago, we met here to discuss the implications of the German elections for Germany, but also for Europe at large. And now I think all signs on heaven point towards the fact that we'll most likely, or a very high likelihood, have a joint government of CDU, CSU, and the SPD with a Chancellor Friedrich Merz. And what I found very interesting was when you looked at actually what Friedrich Merz stands for in his foreign policies. He said when he becomes Chancellor, in his first days, he will visit Warsaw and he will visit Paris. At the same time, I found it very telling. A few weeks before the elections, when Olaf Scholz went to Kiev, he went through Poland, but he did not visit Warsaw. A few days after Olaf Scholz, we had Friedrich Merz and Markus Söder, so the chairman of the CSU, going to Kiev, going through Poland, but stopping in Warsaw, also for discussions. Now tell us, because at the same time, Friedrich Merz says he wants, again, a leadership role for Germany in Europe. What does this leadership role mean, and what is the role of the Weimar Triangle / Weimar Plus format for Germany in this leadership role?
Yeah, so thank you for these questions, and thank you for having me here, and hopefully me sitting on the far left of you for the political statement on the new government and the leadership ambitions. I think if we look at Germany's position in Europe, we have gone through quite some swings in the last 10 to 15 years. Between 2010 and 2020, there was this discussion about Germany being the reluctant hegemon, the overbearing power in Europe. And then suddenly in the last 3 years, we have gotten back to Germany as a segment of Europe. Maybe both of these visions of Germany were a little bit overdone. But I think one thing that is clear is that the last or outgoing German government did struggle in keeping up the partnerships, particularly with Poland, but also many other European partners, that the Franco-German engine certainly suffered during that time, and that also the many infightings in the German government made it harder for the government to actually reach out to partners. And so I think the new beginning that we have now with the government, which we're expecting to be in place within the next couple of weeks, really is a moment to reshape and restart this partnership. And what I find positive about the agenda that is coming up is sort of on the one hand, the clear ambition to reach out to partners very early on, not only sort of when Friedrich Merz becomes Chancellor, but even before he has. I mean, 3 weeks ago at the European Special Council on Defense, Merz went to Brussels, met with Ursula von der Leyen, met with the head of the European Council, with many other European people parties, heads of state and government. And so I think there is a clear ambition to reach out. The second point is, I think there is the Weimar Triangle and even this Weimar Plus ideas at the heart of the thinking of the new government. So very early on, Friedrich Merz had this idea of a sort of Ukraine contact group that could be composed together at the core of the Weimar Triangle, so France, Germany, and Poland, plus Italy, Spain, and then plus the United Kingdom. So also as a format to bring the UK in. And this, I think, has morphed into this Weimar Plus idea that we have already seen on the level of foreign ministers, of defense ministers, but also to some extent at the level of heads and states and government. And the third point of your question is, how does Germany want to lead? And I think the decisions that we already had, that you mentioned on defense spending, is certainly one where Germany wants to lead. Significant increase in defense spending, significant use of new tools for common procurement, so really to be a partner that works together with others. And thirdly, I think, and this might also be a difference to the previous government, more willingness to work in smaller groups of member states to move ahead, rather than always wanting to bring all 27 together on all questions. And this might be maybe the most controversial point of that. If you think back to Angela Merkel's days, then her mantra was always cohesion of the 27, the EU always has to go together at one speed. And I think what I pick up from Friedrich Merz, but also the new government, is a willingness to take more risks on the national, but also on the European level, and also say, if we always only move at one speed, we will not be able to tackle the challenges ahead. And I think this will also be part of why this Weimar Plus format will become so important.
Mm-hmm. Great. We'll come back to that in a moment, but let's move now geographically to the west a little bit. Let's go to France. And when observing the debates nowadays, I feel and see that in terms of the military, in terms of also economic aspects, this idea of strategic autonomy is relatively prominent. And I guess that quite a few policymakers in Paris, when they meet their European friends and colleagues, they probably think or even tell them, well, we told you so for many, many years, right? And so my question would then be about this strategic autonomy debate, because it is very much at the core also of, as we understand French foreign policy and understanding of Europe. Is the Weimar Triangle and the Weimar Plus format the format through which to channel those kind of efforts to be more strategically autonomous?
Thank you for your question. Thank you for the invitation. I will try to not be the French arrogant caricature in that subject. I'll try. It's not always easy. For France, it is true that the revival of the Weimar Triangle is an opportunity, but it's also a responsibility, because we have talked a lot about it and we have not done so much. So now we know that we have to go further. And since the creation of the Weimar Triangle in 1991, the cooperation between France, Germany, and Poland has been strengthened, but it lost when Central Europe was integrated, when Poland and other Central European countries joined the European Union, the format of the Weimar Triangle lost its relevance. But since 2022, and especially today with Donald Trump, we see that this format has regained relevance. There is a new opportunity for collaboration with, of course, the deteriorating relationship between France and Germany over the last few years. We have turned more towards Poland. And Poland, with the arrival of Donald Tusk, has also turned more towards Germany and France. So the center of the Weimar Triangle used to be the Franco-German duo. But today, I mean, in the past 2 or 3 years, the shift has been to Poland, definitely. So for France, the Weimar Triangle is not just a diplomatic forum, it should be at least a cornerstone of European security. With the US focusing on the Indo-Pacific, with growing uncertainties on the US involvement in European security, Europe should assume much greater responsibility in its own defense, and the Weimar Triangle can serve as a driving force for enhanced military coordination and diplomatic alignment. I think both are crucial today. With the Weimar Plus, we can go even further. While Germany and Poland concentrate on the Russian threats, Spain and Italy are primarily focused on threats from Africa, terrorism, immigration, and France is positioned at the crossroads of those concerns. UK, despite the Brexit, remains a critical security player and balances European commitments with global priorities. So the diversity of the perspectives within Weimar Plus presents, of course, challenges, but also big potential. Together, these nations possess significant military, economic, and political weight, and harnessing this collective power is not just an option, it's a necessity. And I think everybody agrees on that today. Now the question is how. So of course, the most pressing issue before us remains the war in Ukraine. And while some European governments hesitate, others, including France and the UK, push for decisive action. And the question is clear: can Weimar Plus forge a coalition of the willing to lead Europe's response? Well, the recent summit that was held in Paris last week attempted to address this question, but it was a bit disappointing, I believe. The lack of concrete progress, the lack of consensus exposed the deep divisions within Europe more than the unity. So the question remains, how do we move beyond rhetoric and translate political alignment into concrete action? France believes that determined leadership from committed European nations is essential to support Ukraine, to ensure European stability, and to deter further Russian aggression. But I think our vision must extend beyond the immediate crisis in Ukraine, and the long-term question is larger. What is the future of European security governance? Could Weimar Plus evolve into a European Security Council? This is not a very new idea. It has been debated for many years, but today it's more relevant because we might be coming towards that achievement. But there are challenges. We must avoid redundancy with NATO and with EU. We must ensure decision-making efficiency. We must maintain legitimacy of such a format in Weimar Plus. Without these, a European Security Council would just become another bureaucratic layer rather than a decisive force for action. So there are concrete steps that we could make. A key aspect, I believe, of this transformation must include enhanced industrial cooperation in defense. If Weimar Plus is to evolve into a European Security Council, it must prioritize the development of joint defense projects, harmonize procurement strategies, and foster technological innovation in military capabilities. Moreover, today, security extends beyond conventional military threats. It is one of our beliefs that the cognitive dimension of warfare is crucial today. It's the manipulation of information, it's the destabilization of election processes, and the spread of propaganda on social media. And it has become the ultimate battlefield. So Weimar Plus must strengthen resilience against cyber threats by countering hybrid attacks, promoting media literacy, and reinforcing democratic institutions. And we have seen that happening in the past few years between France, Germany, and Poland, which they have increased their cooperation in that field. So first, on the solutions that we should discuss, I think the Weimar Plus nations should establish regular high-level meetings dedicated specifically to security and defense coordination. Second, joint military initiatives, intelligence sharing, and interoperability efforts must be deepened to create a true strategic culture. And I believe that is very important. And luckily, we have already practiced this strategic culture with NATO and with the EU. So third, a crisis response mechanism within Weimar Plus could serve as a pilot initiative, allowing rapid action to emerging security threats. And lastly, aligning with this format with NATO and with the EU while maintaining a degree of independence would ensure both credibility and effectiveness. So in conclusion, the Weimar Triangle and the Weimar Plus format offer a renewed chance for Europe to assert itself on the world stage. And I think that this framework would or could allow, if there's a political will, for innovative governance experiments. And if successful, if those experiments are successful, it could naturally draw interest from other European nations. And as you said, we always see it as a challenge to talk about one speed or two speed Europe. But the idea is if we have a pilot initiative, we can attract all the other countries that are willing to join, and not just EU countries, as we've seen with the UK. That idea of Europe is larger than just the EU borders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joséphine. Now we'll move over to you, Michał. And I'm looking at Donald Tusk's government right now. So Donald Tusk, 2.0 compared to when he was prime minister 15 years ago. And what I see is a very active leadership role that Poland wants to play, not only in the immediate region, but in Europe at large. So when I listen to Polish policymakers, and this is very interesting, whether it's from the current government, from the previous government, they're very proud about highlighting that Poland will have in the foreseeable future the strongest land army in Europe. So they really like to highlight that. We could, of course, ask ourselves the question a little bit provocatively, is the town big enough for 3 sheriffs, so to say? And because Poland is also involved, or at least the previous government was very much involved in increasing and supporting regional integration formats, like the 3 Cs initiative, for instance. There are initiatives like the Bucharest 9, and there are so many different integration initiatives. Tell me, what role does actually the Weimar Triangle play for the current government compared to all those other integration initiatives? And does the current Tusk government see the Weimar Triangle actually as the main way to channel its European policy efforts, as Joséphine said, to have a bit of a laboratory and starting with pilot cooperations and then to large scale them or scale them up in a wider European perspective?
This question is asked very much on time, actually. Thank you very much for invitation. The short explanation, I'm a deputy speaker of Polish Senate and a senator, because the translation of the Polish title of Marshal, which was not translated actually into English in my visit card, so that's why I'm not any officer, any kind of a military man. I'm an elected member of Polish Parliament, a senator, and the deputy speaker of Polish Senate. So, why this question about the role for the current government of the Weimar Triangle is so on time? Because just recently, Donald Tusk bring from Paris a very important message for the Polish people that the French-Polish treaty is finalizing now. And as many people in Poland understood, this treaty will include a very serious guarantees of safety for Poland, using all the possible means which France has at its disposal. Taking into account that we are facing a very tough election campaign in Poland, in which obviously American administration will play a very important role. And you will see for the first time in Europe, you will see in Poland in 2 months what it means when Trump is involved in politics in the huge European country. I think that all of you are totally underestimating what will going on in Poland very soon. Look from the Trump perspective. There is a 40 million country in the heart of European Union with 13th budget of defense in the world, a big spender in NATO, a big spender in USA. We are the only country we are not receiving any penny from the USA. We are paying to USA all the time. And you can have, without using any illegal means, without using any force, you can just using all legal political means, you can influence the elections in such an important country. Ask yourself if Donald Trump will not do it. This guy is publicly talking about his ambition to take over Canada, to take over Panama Channel. And so there is no reason why this guy, who is actually mentioning Poland quite often in his speeches, pointing us out as a positive example, will not be involved in the election campaign, especially when, and as you know, Mr. Trump is not very known for not taking to account what someone said about him. And our Prime Minister said that Donald Trump was an agent of KGB for 30 years. And those words are somehow hanging between Warsaw and DC right now. So I'm rather certain that Mr. Trump will try to make a very unpleasant surprise for Tusk and to support Mr. Nawrocki, who is a candidate of Law and Justice Party. Not rough, and obviously it will hugely influence the second round of the Polish elections. And that's why the message Tusk is bringing to Polish people, which actually I commented in Poland that I know Polish anthem, and there is no mention of Donald Trump in Polish anthem, but there is a mention of Napoleon Bonaparte in that. So taking about the great people in history. So this message, in the very heat period of Polish election campaign, that France will try somehow to replace the mental role of United States of America in Polish life, because this is a mental role. We all, including myself, to be honest, I feel safer knowing that American soldiers are in Poland. I feel safer knowing that we have still NATO and we have Article 5. And believe me, I will do whatever I can not to break the links between Poland and the United States. But I also know that nothing depends on us in this game, because we have no control of what Trump will do. And I think that we are living in such a new geopolitical situation that this proposition of Weimar Triangle, which I see as an attempt to reconstruct a European dream, not a European Union not any of European institutions we know already. We know we have to reinforce, we have to rebuild, we have to reignite a European dream. Because what is the answer for current challenges, if not a clever, with a good reason, united Europe? I don't see any answer other than European Union, obviously reformed, obviously different. But when we are talking about the current situation, we have to know that all the problems we are facing in the Western countries are coming from the outcome of our free elections, which means that for the very beginning of our discussion, we have to think how to convince the people to support our ideas. Because we had in our history millions of discussions in such a established circles like today's. But I remember I was chairing the first ECR group, and it was the time when the group from the conservative side, the British conservative side, was equally divided between those who were in favor of staying in the EU and those who were Eurosceptics. And I was a chairman of all of that, which was quite challenging, by the way. But I remember when we were starting the ECR group, the Republican Party was the party who was actually warning us before splitting with German CDU and CSU. The Republicans, they were the guys who were calling us, they were inviting us to DC and asking us not to split the European right, not to split the European center right. Today, the policy of the Republican Party is actually much more far right than you can imagine. Everything is changing in today's world. And part of this process was started here in Britain with Brexit. And why Brexit happened? Because at the end of the day, the British people voted to leave the European Union. And it was a free and democratic referendum. As unfortunately, I can say, free and democratically American people elected Donald J. Trump for the second time, knowing all about him, living in the free society. So that's why day after he was re-elected, I said, we are living in the new world. And as soon we understand that we are in the completely new world, it's better for us. Because I think that even today's discussion is partly based on the world which no more exists. And the European answer, including the cooperation between for today, the strong European nations which are in the heart of Europe, and taking into account all historical, differences and problems between especially Poland and Germany, because with France, we didn't have any particular historical problems. As I mentioned, we have a Napoleon in our national anthem. And but this, what I would expect actually from the political class of Germany, Poland, France, and other European countries as well, is to prepare our societies to these new challenges. Because, every time in I will finish. Every time in the democratic society, the politicians before the elections are telling us, I'm a politician myself for 30 years, this is the most important elections in our history. Yeah, you remember all the words in all your significant countries. This is the most important election in our country. Everything is at stake. But unfortunately, today, in every of actually over-mentioned countries, including my country, every election could change everything. Today, because we survived it in Poland already, we had a law and justice government, and we can soon have a law and justice government in Poland again, who will be a strong ally of Trump. Acting along with Trump on European platform, let's say, it will change the situation inside the European Union, because you will have not a small, with all my respect, small Hungary, but you will have a Poland, which will follow, let's say, advice of the White House concerning European politics. It will have a huge impact on Europe. I'm sorry to say, but if the next general elections in Germany will be won by AfD, or if the next president of France will, today we know it will not be Madame Le Pen, but it could be someone.
Not so sure.
Okay, but you cannot anymore exclude this option, because 10 years ago, no one would believe that Trump will be re-elected. Even if some would believe that Trump could be elected for the first time, everyone would be certain that he will be, after first term, he will be vanished. Now he was re-elected with the strong mandate of the American people. Guys, we are living in the new world. And actually, out of my opportunism, I would say that Europe is the only answer we have. Because with even strong France, even strong Germany, I'm not talking about Poland, we will not survive alone in this world. So we have to be together. And hopefully Britain will rejoin this family sooner or later. That's my personal opinion, I would like to mention. However, today it sounds very, very strange. I am still conservative, and I consider myself still conservative. In Polish terms, obviously, talking about Poland.
Thank you so much, Michał Kamiński, for this very strong statement of the dream of Europe and the role also that the Weimar Triangle might play. I find it very interesting when you mentioned the role that elections can also play, and I will come in a second because I saw already a certain rebuttal or disagreement, but I think that's very interesting. We will come to that in a second. Before this, we go to Peter Watkins, because I mentioned quite a few events that happened in the last time, or in the last week, and even in the few last days, which are not very positive. But now we also had something more positive. We had a meeting of Weimar Plus foreign ministers in Madrid a few days ago, and I already said we have this a big summit on May 19th between the UK and the EU. And my question is now, the UK finds itself a bit, of course, after the Brexit vote, you were out of the European Union, but let's say the channel wasn't suddenly, it didn't turn from 50 kilometers into 500. So geographically, we are still there. We see some, let's say, certain reapproachment, some signals, some rhetoric that changed quite significantly. But we still saw until very recently this idea of the special relationship between the UK and the United States. Now, obviously, we have the situation where the UK can say, well, we just received half of the levels of tariffs that, for instance, the European Union received, just 10%, and the EU received 20% of tariffs that were imposed now yesterday on Donald Trump's Liberation Day. But my question is then, will the Weimar Plus format, to some extent, replace this special relationship that the UK had with the United States, and there will be a certain reorientation towards Europe with solving or with engagement by the Weimar Plus format?
Well, thank you, Michael. I think there's a very simple answer to the question you just put to me, which is no. But I will develop that a little bit. I mean, just by way of background, I spent most of my career in the Ministry of Defence, and in particular working on international defence cooperation with the other members of the Weimar Plus group, bilaterally or multilaterally. And I would actually like to pick up some of the themes that Joséphine raised, but I'm afraid in doing so, as Bonaparte has been mentioned a few times, I will probably illustrate one of his sayings, which is that the English are a nation of shopkeepers. And I want to take it a slightly more practical and capability-based approach to it. So, as has been noted, the Weimar Triangle is long established. The UK wasn't part of it at the beginning, but I would just like to reassure you that we did actually take quite a close interest in what it was up to. And I was working in Germany at the time in the British Embassy, and that was one of my jobs, to keep an eye on the Weimar Triangle. Weimar Plus is obviously very new, and I'm glad that the UK is part of it, and I think it speaks to a wider recognition of the UK's enduring contribution to European security. The question that I wanted to address was, is it a good format in which to pursue the broader goal of strengthening European defence capabilities? I think we all agree now that that is what we have to do. I think the only debate now is about what are the best ways and means. So just a little bit of background, just to emphasise something that people don't always remember, which is actually the UK has had very close defence links with all the members of the Weimar Plus group for a very, very long time. I won't, give you the long litany of treaties and other things, but obviously Lancaster House with France, the Trinity House agreement with Germany, defence cooperation with treaty with Poland, many bilateral projects and multilateral projects and so on, which I worked on a lot in my career, and I think actually really add substance to cooperation. And of course, very close links with Italy and Spain as well. And just to mention capabilities, there is something cooking which could be quite significant, where there is significant overlap between its membership and the Weimar Plus, which is the European Long-Range Strike Approach, ELSA, which is actually the Europeans finally beginning to work on developing some of the capabilities for which they have relied too long solely on the Americans. So UK engagement with Weimar Plus has pretty extensive, if somewhat untidy roots. The other thing I'd just like to say, again, to put it in context, is that this idea of sort of minilateral groupings, again, it's not new, it's been around for a long time. I mean, I was involved in the 90s in negotiating a thing called the Letter of Intent with a number of countries, some represented here. Many people say, many analysts say, it's not a good idea to have all these little groupings. They weaken the alliance or the European Union. I mean, I don't think so, actually. I think they're a pretty pragmatic response to the difficulties of trying to do business at 27 or 32. But I would say that they do carry transactional costs. For ministers and officials of countries who belong to two or more of them, they take up an awful lot of time, which is not available for other things. And so I would suggest that we apply, as we're in England at the moment, a version of Occam's razor to these groupings, i.e. they should not be multiplied without necessity. But I do see value in Weimar Plus for two big reasons. One is because it brings together 6 of the leading European powers, including one outside the EU, but also because it transcends Northern and Southern Europe. I think it's important that Italy and Spain are part of it. But you do always wonder, there are others. I mean, for me, it's a bit odd that it doesn't include Finland, Sweden, and Romania. And I think it's good that the UK is involved, but frankly, the real significance of the UK's inclusion will depend on what happens next. Its practical value with respect to defence capabilities and industrial capacity is less obvious to me, partly because it doesn't include one of the obvious powerhouses, which is Sweden, in terms of defence capability. And of course, the pressing issue, and I'm mindful that Joséphine is sitting down there, is how is the UK going to be aligned with the EU's growing defence industrial agenda? And I think we have to find a solution to that. I think there are solutions on the table. There are models in other areas like Horizon and Copernicus and so on, but not all countries at the moment seem to agree that the UK should be realigned. One question was, can Weimar Plus become a European Security Council? This is the governance question. I did listen very carefully to what Michał just said, but at the moment I'm not actually convinced that a European Security Council would be the right thing to do now. We do have to keep the US and Canada engaged for as long as possible. And ironically, this debate at the moment over Greenland and the Arctic shows just how intertwined North American and European security is. And it's rather a shame that the Trump administration's tactics and tone are inhibiting rather than facilitating cooperation in the High North. So just to wrap up on the governance point, with any of these councils, whatever you want to call them, there is always a lot of countries that think they should be at the table. There is one model, which is the E3, France, Germany, and UK, but it's obviously too small and seen as too exclusive. But at the moment, I would say Weimar Plus slightly falls between the stools. I think it would need to be a bigger group in order to play that European Security Council role. And it's pretty obvious to me who the other countries are that would need to join it. And you'd have to have some sort of arrangement for rotating members and so on. Also, I think, being rather controversial, certain countries should have veto rights, but only certain countries, and otherwise it should operate on consensus on a basis that a single country cannot block it. But I think, governance is important, but let's not get into sort of fantasy governance exercises. I mean, to me, the priority now should be building capabilities and adapting our command and control structures and demonstrating the political will to use them. With respect to capabilities, I now think we're seeing a sensible division of labor emerging between NATO and the EU, with NATO basically setting the requirements and the EU helping countries to meet them. With respect to military command and control, there is no shortage of military headquarters in Europe, but we have to adapt them so that they can play the roles that they might need to play in the future. And I'm pretty confident that the political framework will evolve as it needs to provide the umbrella, if you like, over all those activities. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. So before I open the floor for questions, and we already have 2 questions now, we have 3 questions in the chat. I would like to just ask very briefly, Joséphine, about the elephant in the room, because again, talking about this week's event, we had the ruling in France against Marine Le Pen. And I saw today in the morning first opinion polls about hypothetical start of Jordan Bardella in the presidential elections, and he got 35%. He's by far ahead of any other candidate. And my question is, because France, and you rightly said, even geographically, when you're talking about the Weimar Plus format, France borders to all the countries but Poland. And at the same time, it has a very important also coordinative role in all that. It shapes the narrative about strategic autonomy. And the question is, if in 2 years' time, we should actually see a change of the direction in France. And I find it very interesting when we had the so-called Berliner Runde in Germany after the elections, which is a debate after opinion polls are issued and released. And you usually have high-level representatives of the parties talking about it, and the representatives of the CDU said, we have to get our act together. I'm paraphrasing now, and now I'm quoting, otherwise we'll have French realities in Germany, referring to the very strong polarization between far right and far left. And what they have in common is a very Eurosceptic, at least, approach, and very skeptic approach towards NATO, very strong focus on national solutions. And that's why the question is, how much can our partners, can your partners in Poland, in Germany, rely on France, considering that you will have very, very important presidential elections? And I think, as Michał said, every election is the most important election. This election will be very important as well. How crucial is it, and can your partners rely on France in light of that?
Well, that's a big question. First, on Marine Le Pen, the question is not answered yet whether she'll be able to be candidate or not, because the justice system says that they will review in time the first judgment. So there's a big political battle right now because of that ruling of Monday. But it doesn't matter who is the candidate of that political party, because they are indeed in every polls rolling ahead. So the question is, could France be ruled by a far-right political party? Yes, but so could Germany, so could Poland, and so could the UK. Like today, we have the planets are aligned. We have Keir Starmer, we have Friedrich Merz, we have Emmanuel Macron, and we have Donald Tusk. But it's extremely fragile. As you mentioned, and I totally agree, the biggest threat today is the destabilization of our election processes in legal ways and illegal ways. And we have been focused on Russian interference because it's the most obvious and the less discreet interferences, maybe. But we've seen that J.D. Vance and Elon Musk have not been afraid of interfering into German elections and calling the people to vote for the AfD. So tomorrow we can assume that they will do the same in Poland and that they will do the same in France to have parties that are more aligned with their views on the world and on Europe. So of course there is a risk, but the risk is shared. I think it's not riskier in France than any other of the countries we mentioned, but it's because it's so fragile that we need to act quickly. And the debates we have today, the debates we've had for years and for months and now for weeks, it's still going too slow. So of course it's a very important question. It's a question on governance. So we should take decades to think about it, but we don't have those decades ahead of us. We have a very important question to answer is, are we going to be able to protect our democracies right now? In 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, depending on the next elections going on in Europe. So it's not a matter of 5 or 10 or 15 years. And with that, we have the Ukraine war. Well, it's not getting close to a ceasefire or a peace process anyway, but still, the question remains, are we going to be able to help Ukraine win the war or not lose it too hard and just gain some time before Russia is ready to invade some other countries? Of course, we won't see Russian tanks in Paris or Madrid, but the question, if we see Russian tanks in Tallinn or Warsaw, that question is relevant. And even though I do believe also that we should rely on NATO and on American as much as we can, we must be very, we don't have the luxury to believe that there will be allies forever. We can hope, and we all hope, because it would be so much easier, but strategically, we have to imagine the worst case scenario and to be ready in case, let's not say they become enemies, but they just don't stay allies or don't want to stay focused on Europe at all. So what governance on European security and European defense can we propose, not to replace NATO, but to make sure NATO survives the departure of Americans? And I don't have the answer, but I think that answer has to be found very quickly because it's an urgent matter. And as I said, planets are aligned right now because we all have pro-European and pro-European defense and security leaders, but we have maybe 6 months for Poland and maybe 2 years for France.
You know, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but strengthening the military cooperation in Europe is not actually and cannot be seen as anti-American. It's actually what Trump is requiring from us. He's asking for it. So we are just fulfilling his dreams.
Great, thank you so much. We are exactly at the 1 hour mark, which leaves us with 30 minutes for questions and answers. I would have a few more follow-up questions, but I would also like our audience to give them the chance to actually pose a few questions, and they're free in the chat, but let's maybe start with one here. You were first. Please introduce yourself very briefly.
Perfect. William Dash from Gatehouse Advisory Partners. One kind of thought and then a question maybe more for the Europeans. There's two nuclear powers in Europe, so France and the UK. Do we think the risk of a far-right government in France, which is more unreliable, more opposed to the EU, and maybe a bit more friendly to Russia, will create more impetus for other European countries, EU member states, to kind of make good with the UK on defense and on security, given the kind of final insurance option of UK nuclear power?
Well, it could, but the debate we have in France, and I don't want to shock anyone, but is that UK might not be as autonomous in its use of the nuclear weapon as France is. So maybe it could be a choice of Europeans, but I don't think it would help them much more than what the American umbrella is right now, or at least not alone. So I think that's why, and it doesn't depend which government rules, France and UK can both play the role of protectors at the nuclear level of Europe. But I think it has to be combined. France alone could do it, but as we've mentioned, France is already seen as the arrogant player that wants to incarnate European defense. So I think we would rather cooperate with England on that matter more.
I'm just going to come in just to clarify something. I mean, first of all, the UK nuclear deterrent is assigned to NATO, and it has been since about the early 1960s. And therefore, the UK already provides a degree of extended deterrence for other NATO countries. The second point, I mean, I have to underline this, is that it is operationally independent. I mean, yes, it depends on quite a high degree of material support from the Americans, but it is operationally independent. And in terms of any future European arrangements, I would agree with Joséphine. I would like to see the UK and France work together on that. And we already have a close dialogue. We have a joint nuclear commission that goes back to the early 1990s, and there's a lot to build on. And I'm sure there's discussions going on that I'm not supposed to know about and I'm not going to talk about. I would hope they are happening.
Yeah, because from the Polish perspective, we don't want to see any actually contradictions between France and UK in terms of defense. But what I jokingly proposed back in Poland publicly is, again, when Trump is saying you have to pay for your security. So I say, and why France? Because we are spending a lot of money in USA. And we've been actually, Russia said, the Russia answer for this rumors of the possible French nuclear umbrella over Poland was that France has only 50 missiles. So I said, so we can buy more because we have a lot, we have budget. So Poland has not nuclear weapon itself, but why we and other countries, we cannot supply UK and France with additional missiles from our own budget. It's exactly what Trump is saying. If you want to be protected, you have to pay. So it's a kind of European solution. If the less, let's say, wealthy European countries are collecting money for the more wealthy European countries who has the nuclear capacities to feel more secure. And I think that, to be honest, I've been countless times in Ukraine during the war. And my personal experience is that in today's war, the crucial, obviously a part of the nuclear component, the crucial part is air defense. And I think that this is the most significant part of the European defense system we should build together, and which cannot be built separately, because from obvious geographical reasons we have to protect this territory together. And I think that one of the first steps towards making real European defense policies to establish a common pan-European air protection or missile protection system in which every country can participate, even those countries who are, let's say, less wealthy.
Can I add something, or do we have to pass the time? I want to add two thoughts from a German perspective. I think the first one is broader on security and defense. There is a huge interest in including the UK in formats, both like the Weimar Plus, but also to find a way to attach it or have it participate in EU initiatives. And so the newest idea of that rearm proposal, the 150 billion euros loan facility, but also the idea of common procurement, there I think might be a little bit of a difference between Germany and France, where I think both Poland and Germany and others are pushing for the idea that there could be a security and defense partnership between the EU and the UK, and that this security and defense partnership would enable the UK, but also other third country partners like Canada to participate in joint procurement, joint European defense initiatives. And I think this is something that should be in the interest of both the UK and also the EU Europeans. The other point of your question was about nuclear deterrence and the trust in each other. And I think there is a development that Germany is more actively thinking about that. So when Macron first put the idea on the table to have a conversation about a European element in the French nuclear deterrent, the German response was, can we please talk about something else? And this time, the new, most likely upcoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz has signaled there is a willingness to start that conversation, but it's a very delicate conversation, because at the end of the day, a nuclear deterrent can only function if you have one person who has a red button and can make the decision to push it, and can make that decision to do that quite quickly. And Macron has also made clear that this person will always remain to be the French president. And so I fear we are heading for the more the distrust is raising in the dependency on the American nuclear deterrence, the more difficult these discussions will become. And they are not just between the countries represented here, but basically for all countries within NATO. I recently was at a conversation about Turkey's role in European security architecture. And they said, whereas they have somewhat trust in the American nuclear deterrence, can you imagine Turkey trusting in the French nuclear deterrence? It's a very delicate question that I think will be facing a lot of our European countries. And I don't think there's an easy answer, even if we exclude all the question marks we might have about the future next president in France or the future development in the UK.
Thank you very much, Nicolai. So many questions. I will come back in 1 second, but I saw you're next. I would just like to ask you one question, so we also give the people in the chat the chance to pose a question, Nicolai. And because you are the head of the Europe program, and there's a question posed by Edward Burke. He asks, how do we ensure that European defense initiatives like Weimar Plus, ELSA, that you also mentioned, and the Joint Expeditionary Force and so on, do not overlap in the future? Or is there a need for a non-EU European defense organization that fosters strategic/operational coherence and avoid duplication, while also working very closely with the EU on defense procurement/coherence?
So I think my approach to that is that we don't need another institution to make the institutions that are already complex more complex. And this is why I'm also quite skeptical about that European Security Council idea. I think Weimar Plus works because it's not institutionalized. And if we would need to sit down now and work out who are going to be the rotating member, are there countries who should have a veto, what should be the decision-making powers of that, I think we would only twist our minds into some new form of idea that only complicates things. And I'm also of the opinion that always playing NATO and the EU against each other is an intellectual trap that will only keep us from making the progress that is necessary. And so my answer to that question is maybe untypical non-German, as pragmatic and as flexible as possible, and trying to create linkages between the institutions that we already have and use flexible formats. What I find good about Weimar Plus is that it doesn't have a formal decision-making power. So the countries can there coordinate, and they can bring different countries in a flexible manner, and then they can bring in these ideas within NATO, within the EU, or within other flexible formats. And that for me is the most promising one and approach. And then we need to achieve two things. We need to achieve that every cooperation we do is framework independent. So that the capabilities we create can actually be used within NATO, within the EU, within coalition of the willings, so that we don't create a competition between these institutions. And the second thing that we should achieve is that we link these platforms as much as possible. And this is why I think something like an UK-EU security defense partnership would be so important, so that if we set up something with the EU where we build on the EU strengths in regulating the defense single market or doing common procurement, that this is open to the UK. But then if we do something like ELSA, which is more tied to NATO, this could then also be open to all EU member states, so that we create sort of links between these institutional platforms rather than creating a new one, which will add another complex additional institutional layer.
Thank you very much, Nicolai. Now, let's go over here.
Yes, thank you. Anna Matveeva, King's College London. I would like maybe to probe you a little bit more on NATO and where you draw a line between the Weimar Plus and NATO and also European Union. Maybe a bit controversially, what are the measures which you outlined and the plans and the needs and demands? Why cannot they be realized in the existing NATO format, where UK is already a member, so you do not have that kind of barrier there? Because all what Trump wants is just to for the United States to play a lesser role and give more space to Europeans. So why Europeans would not just take that space and run with it, rather than creating some kind of alternative or complementary or something informal? So yeah, what are the obstacles to going ahead with these measures within NATO?
Well, I think the obstacle is political obstacle, because as you said, with NATO, we have everything we need. We have a strong European pillar in NATO that we can enhance even more and strengthen, and we have the means to do that. We have all the countries, European and non-Europeans, that could participate. We have a strategic culture. We have been in operations together, so we know how to be interoperable and so on. So NATO and reinforcing the European pillar of NATO would be the ideal solution. And I totally agree. We are talking about so many other formats, so many other dialogue solutions, and we are avoiding one simple but existential question: what are the objectives? And I believe that if we focus so much on the format and on the ideas of what governance and with whom and how and so on, it's just because we haven't decided on the objective. A few years back, the European Union published the European Strategic Compass. And it's a very big document with a lot of objectives, a lot of threats that were identified, a lot of tools that could be managed together and so on, but no clear strategic diplomatic alignment of what are the biggest threats today, in 2 years, in 5 years, to whom exactly, and so on. Nothing that operational. And so I think we are still very late in our appreciation of the challenges and the objectives. If we go to war somewhere, we have to know what for and who is the enemy and why do we want to fight that enemy? Well, today it's the same thing, and I don't think there is one enemy. I think it would be too, it would be actually a danger to only see Russia today as the main enemy and to dedicate all of our forces to that threat. Because if you listen to Italy and Spain, and they are right, there is a direct threat with terrorism and with the instability in the Sahel region, and France also agrees with that. So there are multiple objectives, but we need to prioritize, and maybe we need to organize. Well, if France, Italy, and Spain can dedicate more forces to the threat in the south, they could do so. And if, as you said, Weimar Plus doesn't make any sense if we don't add the Nordic states, the Baltic states, and so on, because first, they have a big threat at their border. They are the more in danger with Russia. And second, they have military capabilities. They have industrial capabilities too. So they have to be part of it. So my thought would be to make sure we are aligned on the diplomatic and strategic objectives, and then the plan or the solutions will be easier to find.
I would just add, I think NATO is the framework which sets the requirements. I think that's becoming clearer now. The idea of the EU setting military requirements, I think, is quietly receding. Also, NATO is responsible for standardization, and I would like to see NATO being much more vigorous in that. I think our poor Ukrainian friends have discovered what standardization meant in practice. But trying to do things at 32 is quite difficult. So I think when it comes to pursuing specific projects, whatever they might be, having smaller groups, getting on with it is fine. And I don't see that as a tension. I mean, it's just a practical management solution.
Thank you. And how many more questions do we have? 1, 2. All right, because we have 13 more minutes. So let's get them together. Yes.
Sarah Ludford, the member of the House of Lords, and I was an MEP for 15 years. And if I could just make a comment for my question, these pragmatic, flexible intergovernmental arrangements are fine, but they're not transparent for any democratic accountability. I don't want to hijack the debate in that direction, but I mean, people castigate the EU for lack of democracy and transparency, but that ain't nothing compared to intergovernmentalism. But my question is to Michał Kamiński, and it's probably my lack of understanding, but I wasn't really clear what the Polish PIS wants to see. I mean, you talked about how we're living in a completely new world, new challenges, but we could have a PIS government again, which is a strong ally of Trump. But I don't think Trump really wants to see European defence cooperation. He wants higher European defence spending. But that's not necessarily the same thing as strong defence cooperation in Europe. So could you just clarify what Polish PIS
Let's get the
wants?
second question first. And then...
Yes, thank you. Quite Pilaus, Deputy of Estonian Embassy. Also comment on the question. So while I agree that these unilateral groupings can be spearheads within the existing, within EU, within NATO, at the same time, I think we have to be very careful when we are creating formats, especially new formats, semi-institutionalized or institutionalized formats that start discussing defense and security issues that might possibly relate to or influence countries that are not at the table. So this is just obviously very Estonian standpoint, you understand. And also then, my question comes from that, and I very much agree with Mr. Kamiński that none of us are immune to what has happened. None of us are immune to the Trumps and Orbans and Ficos that we see today. So the real question is how we create inner resilience within the formats that we already have, within the institutions that we already have. And if we start talking about future institutions or formats, then then how do we safeguard ourselves against ourselves in the future, basically? Because in that case, I don't think giving veto right to anyone anywhere anymore is the right way to go.
So did you pose the question specifically to
No,
us? Or just general?
just
Yeah.
general.
So, Michał?
Yeah, but, you know, your question about a law and justice peace party, it's a very actually legitimate question, but I'm not the right person to answer it because I left this party 15 years ago just because they turned to the extreme right. That was the reason why, as one of the founder member of Law and Justice Party, I was, you know, I think in charge of the most important election campaigns. I was the chairman of Kaczyński campaign for the mayor of Warsaw. And then when he was elected the president, I served as his secretary of state. I was very close to the late President Kaczyński, who died in the crash. But the reason why I left the party was that it was not a conservative party anymore in the terms I used to describe myself as a conservative, as a moderate conservative, because they went very far from, you know, being Eurosceptical, being very radical, and you know, at the end, which is now the only problem they have with Trump. At the end of the ruling, they voted along with Iran against Israel in UN, and I think in Trump's eyes, it's one bridge too far. They went, and that's the problem of Kaczyński today. I mean, he's today actually he's facing a lot of other problems, but he's still, in my opinion, I just gave an interview flying here, and this interview made a huge impact in Polish public because I said that in my opinion, Nawrocki is now a favorite of the second round. For many reasons, but one of the reasons is the Trump factor. I'm just afraid of Trump influence, and that that's a Chatham rules. So I just want also to wake up our, let's say, liberal side, democratic side, because they're actually, it's like Kamala Harris, you know, and Democrats just before the crash, November. You know, because they cannot believe. You know, I was in DC. I talked to my friends for many years, very clever people, and they were saying to me, Michael, you know, it will not gonna happen. Okay? It will not gonna happen. The American people will never re-elect this guy. The American people re-elected this guy. So when I'm in Poland today and I'm hearing, no, Michael, no, Law and Justice will not, they will not win the election again. I'm saying for 4 times. We had a second round in Poland in the last 20 years. 4 times we have a second round between Law and Justice and the Civic Platform. And the result is 3-1 to Law and Justice. Only once Civic Platform won the second round, and it was 2010 when Jarosław Kaczyński himself was running, and he's very unpopular. That's the paradox of political situation. We have 2 leaders, Tusk and Kaczyński, they are 2 most unpopular politicians in Poland. So that's why Tusk lost the elections, Kaczyński lost the elections, so they are putting another candidates because they are unelectable in Poland. That's the paradoxical situations. The guys who are controlling the situation in Poland on both sides are very, very unpopular. Yeah, it's very hard to understand, but that's true. Look at, I'm not, it's not my opinion, that's the facts, because you see the numbers of the election and polls, and the reason why Tusk himself is not running and Kaczyński himself is not running, because they ran both and they lost. So that's, but if the Polish second round will be constructed on the line of security, defense, and Europe will be seen as a more important factor in defense as United States, which today I don't see it. We will win the second round. Peace will lose. But if the second round will be constructed over the line you are in favor of the government or against the government, we will certainly lose the election. And this is serious. And that's why I'm very concerned about the Polish situation, because this is very, very important country. I know that Poles are used to overestimate the importance of our country, but in this particular case, we are not overestimating this. It will be very important for all other countries as well.
Any other comments? Any other questions? Yes.
I greatly respect what you were saying about needing to see the downside case, but equally, I'm slightly puzzled in that I don't quite see how the prospect of J.D. Vance and Elon Musk campaigning actively for America is likely to increase the vote for Trumpite parties. And secondly, are we not wildly overestimating the capabilities of Trump and his cohorts? As of today, and I'm an investor, as of today, the general view is that there is likely to be a recession in America. The general view, and we already see this in elections, is that Trump is making himself incredibly unpopular. So may we not in 2 years' time be facing a completely different but much more alluring environment rather than constantly worrying in a very European and British ways about the potential for it to get worse?
Okay. Actually, I agree with you that the next midterm elections will be crucial, because usually in midterms the ruling party is losing.
Even if they're normal.
Yes, but today, if Trump will significantly lose the midterm elections, it will turn the situation in the Republican Party. Why he's controlling the Republican Party today? Because he has this great power of controlling the election process inside the Republican Party, primaries.
Sure.
Because you cannot run, you can be anti-Trump in the Republican Party, but you can't win the elections inside the party. And if Trump will become unpopular, he obviously will lose the influence inside the party. It will change the situation. But for today, we are living in such a different world that I don't know if we will see it. And you asked about the possibilities of Mr. Musk to influence the elections. We talked about it with German friends. It's what Musk can do is just influence his social platforms, and they can easily change the mood in the society, because the social platforms, you saw it in Romania, when the completely unknown candidate, only through the activity in the social platforms and the huge support from Russia, was exploding in popularity.
Thank you. We have one final question, very, very short. We have 1.5 minutes left.
Very brief.
Yes.
I agree with you about the significance of the Polish presidential elections, and I'm wondering why you haven't mentioned Sławomir Mencen, whether he is giving further to the right candidate or the chance of.
Yeah, but maybe you're not watching it very closely, but in a couple of days, he made an interview, and I actually said that he made it too early, because in this interview, he actually explained all his views, which is making him, very, very, especially in the views of the young woman, because his views about abortion are controversial even in Poland. Even in Poland, his views about abortion are seen as out of mind, actually. So he is now losing. And actually, I was representing the view that he would be a better counter-candidate to Trzaskowski in the second round than Nawrocki, because Nawrocki will have the whole support of the PiS, which is a strong party, and possible support from Americans. The Americans will never support such an open anti-Semite like Mencen. So he will be actually left without this support. And I don't think that anti-Semitism in Poland is today a very strong emotion. I think that we have rather a strong support for Israel among many people in Poland, because we are actually, there is a phenomenon of Polish anti-Semitism, obviously, but there is also a phenomenon of Polish pro-Israeli and pro-Jewish sympathies, which are very strong in Poland as well. So but Mencen is not a factor today. I don't think because he's actually, he said that even the raped woman should give a birth to the baby, and he said that the rape in the case of a new baby is he said, oh, okay, even when the start of the life is together with some unpleasant situation. So he described the rape as an unpleasant situation. So I think.
Yes,
Michael, come in a minute. I mean, the thing is, I'm a former bureaucrat. I mean, politics, it strikes me, is inherently unpredictable. Also, we're talking all about Trump. Trump is not the biggest threat to European security. It's Vladimir Putin. And we should be working together to strengthen our common defenses against the Russian threat. And for as long as possible, we should be doing that jointly with the Americans. And not because I think we are getting into, I think you're making this point. We are slightly getting into self-fulfilling prophecy territory if we're not careful.
thank you, Peter. Any final sentences? Very short.
Just to
20
answer your
seconds.
question on inner resilience and how to build it, I think we need to come up with a counter narrative to Putin's narrative or J.D. Vance's narrative. When I was in Madrid last week to a conference, some speakers started by quoting J.D. Vance and the decadence of European moral as a revelation, saying even the Americans are seeing that our moral values are decadent and that we are not democracies anymore. And so I think that's problematic. Those narratives won't convince people that are not already convinced, but they will reinforce all those that tend to believe in that narrative. And so Europe has never built a European narrative. The EU has never made any communication on the achievements and the improvements of being in the EU. We have never found it noble enough to invest in a European narrative and European communication. Our enemies are doing it. Even our allies are doing it for other reasons. So what are we waiting for?
Right?
Yeah, two final thoughts. One maybe less provocative, the other more provocative. The less provocative one, I think the task of a format like Weimar Plus is really to enhance the frameworks that we have. So I think if we are asked about the sort of how problematic is it for small countries to not be at the table, I think the task of something like Weimar Plus is to coordinate and exchange, but not take the decision. And this also, I think, would then allow to bring the views of the others in, because at the end of the day, you take the decisions within the EU, within NATO, and that, I think, is also something that at least the new government in Berlin believes is these formats should not go to the detriment of bringing in the views of the smaller and medium-sized countries. I think this is important. And the second, maybe more provocative one is on the US and the relations to the US. Of course, European security is better when the US is there and when the US is reliable. But this is no longer our choice to make. And I think the realization that we have to take is that we need to prepare for a world where at least the Americans are saying you need to be able to defend Europe without us. Or we're even having a United States that is in direct contradiction to the interest of European states, also vis-a-vis Russia. And that means that we need to create European defense and strengthen European defense wherever possible in a way that is autonomously capable of action. And that doesn't mean we need to actively push the Americans out, but I think we need to accept that the Americans are pulling themselves out. And that requires very different actions than still building on the hope that by some transactional means we can keep the Americans in if they no longer want to be in.
Thank you so much, Nicolai. Thank you so much to everyone for your great questions, for the great interventions of our speakers. And I usually finish all those discussions with saying, and honestly, it can be a political panel, it can be a political on economics. The bottom line is always we need to be quicker, we need to be smarter. But as Joséphine said, the stars align at the moment in a very positive way. And maybe this is the moment that Europe, and I'm talking not about the European Union, but Europe at large, is to seize the moment for the future. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. And now please join us for a small networking reception with sandwiches. Of course, those who are joining us in person at the center, thank you so much to everyone who joined us online from around the UK and around Europe. And join me in a round of applause for our panelists.